In the scorching heat of 1847, Texas merchant's daughter Cassandra Wells never imagined that being captured by Kiaha, a legendary Comanche warrior, would save her life. What she thought was her worst nightmare became her only chance at survival and the most dangerous love story ever told. But when the man who destroyed both their worlds comes hunting, Cassandra and Kiaha must choose: will they remain enemies bound by the past, or forge an alliance that could change everything? Stay with me until the end of this epic tale of forbidden love, betrayal, and justice in the wild frontier. And please comment below with your city so I can see how far this story travels across the world. The sun hung like a merciless eye over the dusty trading post of Cedar Ridge, Texas, its rays beating down on the wooden buildings that seemed to wither under the relentless heat. Cassandra Wells pressed her palm against the window pane of her father's general store, watching the shimmering waves of heat distort the horizon. At 19, she possessed the kind of beauty that made traveling merchants linger longer than necessary: auburn hair that caught fire in sunlight, emerald eyes sharp enough to cut glass, and a spirit that her father, Marcus Wells, often said was too wild for a lady. "Cassie, step away from that window," Marcus called from behind the counter, his weathered hands counting the day's meager earnings. "You know better than to expose yourself like that, not with all the talk going around." The talk. It seemed everyone in Cedar Ridge had something to say about the increasing Comanche raids on settlements to the south. Fear had crept into their small community like smoke from a distant fire, invisible but choking nonetheless. "Father, I'm perfectly safe," Cassandra replied, though she did step back. "Besides, Captain Morrison's men patrol these roads every—" Her words died as the thunder of hoofbeats shattered the afternoon quiet. But this wasn't the measured cadence of cavalry horses. This was something else entirely wild, urgent, and growing louder by the second. Marcus dropped his coins, the metal pieces scattering across the wooden floor with tiny chimes of alarm. "Cassie, get away from that window, now!" Through the glass, Cassandra saw them coming. A war party of Comanche warriors, their painted faces fierce under the blazing sun, their horses kicking up clouds of dust that seemed to swallow the very air. At their head rode a figure that made her blood freeze, tall, powerfully built, his long black hair streaming behind him like a banner of war. Even from a distance, she could see the terrible beauty of his painted face, the way he seemed to become one with his horse, moving with a grace that spoke of countless battles. "Kiaha," whispered Samuel Brennan, the blacksmith, who had burst through their door, his face pale with terror. "It's Kiaha himself leading them. God help us all." The name hit Cassandra like a physical blow. Every person within 100 miles knew that name, whispered it in fear around campfires and in the safety of locked rooms. Kiaha, the Shadow Wolf, they called him. The Comanche warrior whose very presence meant death was riding hard behind. "How many?" Marcus demanded, already reaching for the rifle mounted above the counter. 20, maybe more." Samuel gasped, his massive frame trembling. "They hit the Peterson place this morning. Nothing left but smoke and—" He couldn't finish. Marcus cocked his rifle with a sound that seemed to echo like thunder in the small store. "Where's Morrison? Where are the soldiers?" 3 hours south, chasing shadows while the real threat comes for us." Samuel's voice cracked. "They're not coming back in time, Marcus. We're on our own." Cassandra's heart hammered against her ribs as the sound of approaching horses grew louder. Through the window, she could see people running, hear the screams starting to rise from the far end of town. Mrs. Crawford stumbled past, clutching her infant son, her skirts torn and muddy. Behind her, old Pete, the barber, limped as fast as his aged legs could carry him, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead. "Cassie," Marcus barked, "the cellar now." But Cassandra found herself frozen, watching as the first of the warriors entered the main street. The lead rider, Kiaha, pulled his horse to a halt directly across from their store. Even separated by glass and distance, she felt the weight of his gaze like a physical thing. His face was painted in bold strokes of red and black, making his dark eyes seem to burn with an inner fire. Feathers adorned his hair, and his bare chest bore scars that spoke of countless battles survived. He was magnificent and terrifying in equal measure. "Cassandra!" Her father's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Move!" The spell broke. She spun toward the cellar door just as the front window exploded inward in a shower of glass and splintered wood. A Comanche warrior vaulted through the opening with fluid grace, his war cry splitting the air like a blade. Marcus raised his rifle, but the warrior was faster, his tomahawk catching the sunlight as it arced through the air. The rifle flew from Marcus's hands, and he stumbled backward, clutching his arm where the weapon's stock had struck him. Blood seeped between his fingers. "Father!" Cassandra screamed, lunging toward him, but strong hands caught her around the waist, lifting her clean off her feet. She found herself pressed against a chest that felt like sun-warmed stone, breathing in the scent of leather and sage and something wild that made her head spin. The hands that held her were careful despite their obvious strength, and when she looked up, she found herself staring into the painted face of Kiaha himself. This close, she could see that his eyes weren't the black she'd expected, but a deep brown flecked with gold, like earth shot through with sunlight. There was intelligence there, and something else, a pain so deep it made her own heart ache in recognition. "Please," she whispered the word barely audible above the chaos erupting around them. "Please don't hurt him." Kiaha's expression didn't change, but his grip on her shifted slightly, becoming somehow more protective than threatening. He spoke in rapid Comanche to the warrior who had broken through the window, his voice carrying absolute authority. "No," Marcus gasped from where he knelt on the floor. "Take me instead. She's just a girl. She doesn't know anything about what?" Kiaha's voice cut through the noise like a knife, his English heavily accented but perfectly clear. "About the lies your people tell, about the promises broken like dry grass underfoot." Cassandra's breath caught. She hadn't expected him to speak English, certainly hadn't expected the bitter pain that colored every word. "I don't know what you mean," Marcus said, struggling to stand, despite his injured arm. "We're peaceful people. We don't want any trouble." Kiaha's laugh was sharp as winter wind. "Peaceful." He spoke the word like a curse. "Yes, your mayor Ezekiel Harrow is very peaceful when he signs papers. Very peaceful when he takes our land and calls it law." The name hit Cassandra like a slap. Mayor Harrow was her father's business partner, the man who had courted her for months, with flowers and pretty words, the man her father wanted her to marry. "Mayor Harrow is a good man," Marcus said, but there was uncertainty creeping into his voice. "He's trying to bring civilization to this territory." "Civilization?" Kiaha's eyes blazed. "Your civilization killed my wife. Your civilization burned my village while the children slept." His grip on Cassandra tightened, not enough to hurt, but enough to remind her that she was completely at his mercy. "Your civilization took everything I loved and called it progress." Cassandra felt the world tilt around her. "Your wife." Something flickered across Kiaha's painted features, grief so raw it was like looking into an open wound. "Ayana, her name was Ayana. She was carrying our first child when Harrow's men came in the night." The words hung in the air like smoke, heavy with pain and accusation. Around them, the chaos of the raid continued, shouts, screams, the sound of breaking glass and splintering wood. But in the small bubble of space around Cassandra and Kiaha, there was only the weight of terrible truth. "I don't understand," Cassandra said, her voice barely a whisper. "Mayor Harrow wouldn't. He's not." "He is exactly what you think he is not," Kiaha said, his accent making the words sound like poetry and threat combined. "And you, Cassandra Wells, daughter of his partner, are going to help me prove it. How do you know my name?" "I know many things." Kiaha's eyes never left hers. "I know your father sells guns to Harrow's men. I know you are promised to the man who destroyed my world. I know you have never seen beyond the walls of your comfortable lies." "That's not true," Cassandra protested, but even as she said it, doubt crept in. How many times had she seen her father and Mayor Harrow locked in whispered conversations that stopped the moment she entered the room? How many times had Harrow's eyes held a coldness that made her skin crawl, despite his charming words? "We'll see," Kiaha said simply. Then louder he called out in Comanche. The warriors who had been ransacking the store stopped immediately, their discipline absolute. One of them, a younger man with fierce eyes, approached Kiaha and spoke rapidly in their language. Cassandra caught none of the words, but the urgency was clear. Kiaha nodded and spoke a few sharp words in return. Then he looked down at Cassandra again. "Time to go." "Wait." Marcus struggled to his feet, his face pale with blood loss and terror. "Where are you taking her? What do you want?" "Justice," Kiaha said simply. "Something your people have forgotten the meaning of." "Please," Marcus begged, all pretense of dignity abandoned. "Take anything you want. Money, goods, whatever you need. But leave my daughter." "Your daughter is exactly what I need," Kiaha replied. "She will be safe if she chooses to see truth, instead of clinging to comfortable lies." Before Cassandra could respond, Kiaha lifted her as easily as if she weighed nothing, carrying her toward the shattered window. Outside she could see his horse, a magnificent stallion the color of storm clouds, its eyes as intelligent and fierce as its master's. "Father," she called out as Kiaha swung up onto his horse with her still in his arms. "I'll find you," Marcus shouted back, pressing his good hand against his bleeding arm. "I'll bring help, His words were lost as Kiaha wheeled his horse around and spurred it into motion. Cassandra found herself pressed against his chest again, his arms forming a cage around her that was somehow both prison and protection. The horse's powerful strides ate up the ground, and within moments Cedar Ridge was falling away behind them. The wind whipped her hair across her face, and Cassandra had to fight down rising panic. Everything familiar, everything safe, was disappearing into the dust cloud behind them. Ahead lay only wilderness, vast, unknowable, and dangerous. "Where are you taking me?" she shouted over the thunder of hoofbeats. "Away from lies," Kiaha replied, his voice somehow carrying clearly despite the noise. "Away from the poison your people call civilization." They rode hard for what felt like hours, the landscape changing from the settled area around Cedar Ridge to wilder country. Rolling hills gave way to rocky terrain dotted with scrub oak and mesquite. The sun began its slow descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Gradually, Cassandra became aware that they were no longer alone. Other riders had joined them, the warriors from the raid. She realized, appearing from various directions, like ghosts materializing from the landscape itself. They rode in formation around Kiaha, their discipline and skill evident in every movement. These weren't the savage raiders she'd been taught to fear. They moved like soldiers, like men who understood tactics and strategy. The realization sent another crack through the foundation of everything she'd believed. As the sun touched the horizon, Kiaha finally slowed his horse. They had reached a hidden canyon, its entrance masked by a tumble of boulders that would be invisible to anyone who didn't know exactly where to look. Inside, Cassandra could see the glow of campfires and smell the smoke of cooking food. "A Comanche camp," she whispered, her heart racing with fresh fear. "A place of truth," Kiaha corrected. "Something you have never experienced." He dismounted with fluid grace, then reached up to help her down. His hands were gentle but firm, and Cassandra found herself on shaking legs, surrounded by warriors who watched her with curious but not hostile eyes. An older woman approached, her graying hair braided with beads, and her weathered face kind, despite the hardness of life written in every line. She spoke to Kiaha in rapid Comanche, her tone questioning. Kiaha replied, his voice respectful. The woman's eyes widened, and she looked at Cassandra with something that might have been pity. Grandmother Ituha says you are welcome at our fire, Kiaha translated. She says any enemy of Harrow's is friend to our people. I'm not Harrow's enemy, Cassandra protested automatically. I'm supposed to marry him. The words felt strange in her mouth, as if she were speaking a foreign language. When had she agreed to marry Ezekiel Harrow? Her father had suggested it. Harrow had pursued her, but had she ever actually said yes? Kiaha's expression darkened. Then you are exactly where you need to be. Grandmother Ituha spoke again, her tone firm. She gestured toward a teepee set apart from the others. Its hide walls painted with symbols that seemed to tell a story. She says you will rest there tonight, Kiaha said. She says the spirits have brought you here for a reason, and we must listen to what they would teach us. I don't believe in spirits, Cassandra said, though her voice lacked conviction. You will, Kiaha replied simply. Before this is over, you will believe in many things you once thought impossible. As if to prove his point, a young boy no more than 8 or 9 ran up to them, his face bright with excitement. He chattered rapidly to Kiaha, who listened with the patience of someone accustomed to children's enthusiasm. Little Wolf says the white woman has kind eyes. Kiaha translated, a slight smile softening his painted features. He says she is not like the others who came with fire and iron. Cassandra looked down at the boy, who grinned up at her with gap-toothed innocence. Hello, she said softly. Little Wolf said something to Kiaha, who nodded. He wants to know if you know any stories. Our children love stories. Yes, I know some stories. Good, Kiaha said. Stories are how we keep truth alive. Tomorrow I will tell you a story you need to hear. Tonight you rest. He turned to go, but Cassandra caught his arm. The moment her fingers touched his skin, something electric passed between them, a recognition that went deeper than fear or logic. Why? She asked. Why take me instead of why not just kill them all and be done with it? Kiaha studied her face for a long moment, because killing them would not bring back my wife. It would not heal my people's wounds, but showing you the truth. He paused, his eyes holding hers. Truth has power that no weapon can match. What if I don't believe you? What if I think you're the monster they say you are? Then you will be free to go back to your comfortable lies, Kiaha said. But first you will see, you will know, and then you will choose. He walked away, leaving Cassandra standing beside the painted teepee as darkness settled over the canyon like a blanket. Around her, the Comanche camp came alive with quiet activity, cooking fires being tended, children playing games that involved much laughter, and running adults talking in low voices about the day's events. It wasn't what she had expected. There was no scalp dance, no torture of prisoners, none of the savage brutality she'd been told was the way of the Comanche. Instead, she saw families, people who loved their children, cared for their elderly, and found joy in simple pleasures despite the hardships of their lives. Grandmother Ituha appeared at her elbow, offering a bowl of stew that smelled better than anything Cassandra had eaten in weeks. The old woman spoke gently, her tone encouraging. She says you should eat, came Kiaha's voice from nearby. She says sorrow weighs less on a full stomach. Cassandra turned to find him watching her, his paint washed away, to reveal features that were strikingly handsome, despite the hardness that life had carved into them. Without the war paint, he looked younger, more human, more dangerous to her peace of mind. I'm not sure I can, she admitted. Everything feels wrong. Wrong things often feel right at first, Kiaha said, settling beside the fire. Right things often feel wrong until we understand them. Is that supposed to be wisdom? It is supposed to be truth. Cassandra took a tentative sip of the stew. It was rich and flavorful, warming her from the inside out. What happens now? Now you rest. Tomorrow we begin your education. Education in what? Kiaha stared into the fire, his expression distant. In seeing beyond the stories you have been told. in understanding that the world is not divided into good people and monsters, but into people who choose truth and people who choose comfort. And which am I? He looked at her, then his brown eyes reflecting the firelight. That remains to be seen, Cassandra Wells. That remains to be seen. As the night deepened and the camp settled into quiet, Cassandra found herself lying on a soft furs inside the painted tipi, staring up at the smoke hole that revealed a circle of star-scattered sky. Everything she had known, everything she had believed about the world, felt as distant as those stars. Tomorrow Kiaha would tell her his story. Tomorrow she would have to choose between the comfortable lies of her old life and whatever truth awaited in this strange new world. But tonight, for the first time in years, Cassandra Wells fell asleep without dreaming of wedding dresses and settled futures. Instead, she dreamed of storm-gray horses and eyes like earth shot through with sunlight and a voice that spoke of truth like other men spoke of treasure. The collision of worlds had begun. Dawn broke over the canyon with the soft whisper of wind through stone, and Cassandra woke to find herself disoriented by the unfamiliar sounds of a Comanche camp stirring to life. The hide walls of the tipi glowed amber in the early light, and she could hear children's voices mingling with the low murmur of adults preparing for the day. For a moment she lay still, hoping that everything had been some elaborate nightmare, but the scent of sage and wood smoke, the rough texture of buffalo fur beneath her fingers, and the ache in her muscles from yesterday's hard ride all confirmed the impossible reality of her situation. She emerged from the teepee to find Kiaha waiting beside a small fire, his hair no longer adorned with feathers, his face clean of war paint. In the morning light he looked different, still dangerous, but somehow more approachable. He was preparing what looked like cornmeal cakes on a flat stone, his movements precise and practiced. "You slept," he observed without looking up. "Barely." Cassandra wrapped the blanket grandmother Ituha had given her more tightly around her shoulders. "I kept expecting to wake up in my own bed." Expectations are often disappointments waiting to happen. Kiaha flipped one of the cakes with a wooden spatula. But sometimes they protect us from truths we are not ready to face. Cassandra studied his profile, noting the way the morning light caught the strong line of his jaw, the proud set of his shoulders. "You said you would tell me a story today. After you eat." He handed her one of the warm cakes along with a gourd filled with what tasted like sweetened water. Stories are better received by bodies that are not fighting hunger. The cake was surprisingly good, nutty and sweet, with a flavor she couldn't identify. Around them, the camp was fully awake now, and Cassandra found herself watching the daily routines with fascination. Women worked together preparing food and mending clothing, their conversation punctuated by laughter. Men tended to horses and weapons, but also played with children and helped with camp tasks. It was nothing like the savage chaos she had been led to expect. "It's not what you thought it would be," Kiaha said, following her gaze. "No," she admitted. "Everything I was told." She trailed off, uncertain how to express the growing confusion in her mind. "What were you told?" Cassandra hesitated, then decided honesty might serve her better than polite evasion. "That your people were savages, that you killed for pleasure, tortured prisoners, stole children to raise as your own warriors." Kiaha's expression didn't change, but she saw his jaw tighten slightly. "Some of that is true." The admission surprised her. "Which parts? We do kill. We do take captives. We do raise children who are not born to our blood." His dark eyes met hers. "But your people do the same and call it civilization. That's different, is it?" Kiaha stood brushing crumbs from his hands. "Come, it is time for that story." He led her away from the main camp up a winding path that climbed the canyon wall. Cassandra found herself breathing hard in the thin air, but Kiaha moved with the easy grace of someone who had spent his life in rough country. They climbed until they reached a ledge that overlooked the entire canyon, the camp spread out below them like a child's toys. Beautiful, Cassandra murmured despite everything. Beauty and truth often go together, Kiaha said, settling on a flat rock and gesturing for her to join him. Ugliness and lies are also companions. Cassandra sat carefully, very aware of the drop below and the solid warmth of the man beside her. Is this where you tell me your story? This is where I show you mine, and you decide if you are ready to see yours. Kiaha was quiet for a moment, his gaze fixed on the horizon. 3 summers ago, I had a different life. I was Kiaha of the Honey Eaters Band, war leader of my people, husband to the most beautiful woman in all the nations. His voice carried a warmth that transformed his harsh features. Ayana. Her name meant eternal blossom, and she was well named. She had a laugh that could make flowers bloom in winter and hands that could heal any wound. He paused, pain flickering across his face. Any wound except the ones that mattered most. What happened to her? Your Mayor Harrow happened to her. The warmth vanished from Kiaha's voice, replaced by something cold and deadly. Our village was in a valley 2 days' ride from Cedar Ridge. Good water, good grass for horses, protected from the worst storms. We had wintered there for generations, and the treaties your government signed said it was ours forever. Treaties, paper promises, Kiaha said bitterly. Words that last only as long as they serve the people who wrote them. Harrow wanted our valley for his cattle ranch. He offered to buy it, then offered to trade for it, then tried to convince us to move somewhere else. And you refused. Of course we refused. Would you sell your mother's grave? Would you trade away the place where your children first learned to walk? Kiaha's hands clenched into fists. But refusal was not something Harrow understood. Cassandra felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. What did he do? First, he sent men to steal our horses, then to poison our water. When that failed to drive us away, he came with soldiers and told us we had to leave because the treaties had been reinterpreted. That's not legal. There are procedures, courts. Kiaha's laugh was sharp as breaking glass. Legal. Yes, white man's law is very complicated when it serves white men, very simple when it serves everyone else. Harrow's lawyer had papers. Very official papers that said our valley now belonged to the territorial government, and the territorial government had sold it to Harrow for development. But surely someone could have challenged. Who? Which court listens to Comanche complaints? Which lawyer takes cases that pay in buffalo hides and beadwork? Kiaha shook his head. Your law is like your God. It only helps the people who look like you. The words stung because Cassandra couldn't deny their truth. She had never thought about it before, but now she realized she had never seen a Comanche in any courtroom, never heard of any legal case that favored Indian rights over white settlement. So what happened? We refused to leave. This was our home, our sacred place. Ayana was with child, our first, and she needed to give birth where her mothers and grandmothers had given birth, surrounded by the spirits of our ancestors. Kiaha's voice grew softer, more distant. I thought we could hold the valley. I thought right meant something even in your world. It should. Should and is our different countries, Cassandra Wells. I learned that when Harrow came back with 40 men in the middle of the night. The words hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Cassandra found herself holding her breath, dreading what came next, but unable to stop listening. They set fire to our tipis while people slept, shot anyone who tried to escape. Ayana. His voice broke slightly. Ayana was helping the old women and children get to safety. I was fighting at the other end of the village, trying to give them time to run. Kiaha. I saw her fall. The words came out flat, emotionless, but Cassandra could see the terrible effort it took to keep them that way. She was carrying our son, and she fell, and the fire took them both while I fought men who would never have dared face me in daylight on equal terms. Tears ran down Cassandra's cheeks without her permission. I'm so sorry. Sorry does not bring back the dead. Sorry does not heal burned villages or unborn children. Kiaha turned to look at her, his eyes holding depths of pain that made her heart ache. But truth can prevent the same sorrows from touching others. What truth? The truth about who Ezekiel Harrow really is. The truth about what he has done, what he plans to do. Kiaha's expression hardened. The truth about the man your father wants you to marry. Cassandra felt the world tilt around her. My father doesn't know. He couldn't know about this, and still, couldn't he? The question hit her like a physical blow. Images flashed through her mind, her father's nervous behavior whenever Harrow visited, the hushed conversations that stopped when she entered a room, the way Marcus always seemed to have more money after Harrow's visits than the store's receipts could account for. No, she whispered. He wouldn't be part of something like this. Would he not? Kiaha's voice was gentle but relentless. What do you know about your father's business dealings with Harrow? What do you know about the shipments that come in unmarked crates? What do you know about the meetings held after dark in your store's back room? Each question was another crack in the foundation of everything Cassandra had believed about her life. Those are just business matters, things I wouldn't understand, or things you were not meant to understand. Before Cassandra could respond, the sound of hoofbeats echoed up from the canyon floor. Both she and Kiaha turned to look down at the camp, where riders were approaching under a flag of truce. Even from this distance, Cassandra could make out the blue uniforms of cavalry soldiers. They've come for me, she said, a mixture of relief and something else she couldn't name flooding through her. No, Kiaha said, standing and shading his eyes to study the approaching riders. They have come for something else entirely. As the riders drew closer, Cassandra could see there were only 4 of them, hardly a rescue party large enough to assault a Comanche camp. The lead rider was a tall man in an officer's uniform, flanked by 2 soldiers and a 4th man in civilian clothes. Do you recognize the civilian? Kiaha asked. Cassandra squinted, trying to make out details at this distance. The man was well dressed, sitting his horse with the confidence of someone accustomed to being in charge. Something about his posture, his bearing, was familiar. Oh God, she breathed. It's him, it's Harrow. Yes, Kiaha said with grim satisfaction. The wolf comes to the coyote's den thinking himself safe behind a flag of truce and the pretense of civilization. They watched as the small party rode into the camp below. Even from this height, Cassandra could see the tension in the Comanche warriors who emerged from their teepees' hands, resting casually on weapons while maintaining the courtesy due to visitors under a truce flag. We should go down, Cassandra said, starting to rise. Kiaha's hand on her arm stopped her. Not yet. First, you need to understand what you are about to see. What do you mean? Harrow has not come to negotiate your release. Kiaha said, his eyes never leaving the scene below. He has come to make sure you never have the chance to tell anyone what you have learned here. The words hit Cassandra like ice water. That's ridiculous. He doesn't even know I've learned anything. Doesn't he? Kiaha's gaze was steady, implacable. Think, Cassandra. You disappeared during a Comanche raid on the very day after Harrow visited your father's store. You disappear specifically with me, the one man who knows enough to destroy him. Do you really think he believes in coincidences? Cassandra's mouth went dry. You think he's here to kill me? I think he is here to solve a problem before it becomes larger than he can control. Kiaha stood, his hand moving to the knife at his belt. And I think he is about to learn that some problems only grow larger when you try to cut them down. Below them, the parley had begun. Cassandra could see Harrow dismounting, his movements confident and relaxed. He was a handsome man, she had to admit, tall and well-built, with the kind of easy charm that had made half the unmarried women in Cedar Ridge sigh whenever he walked past. She had been flattered by his attention, pleased by his gifts and pretty words. Now, watching him from this height with Kiaha's revelations fresh in her mind, she tried to see past the surface charm to whatever lay beneath. Was there something cold in his eyes, something calculating in the way he surveyed the Comanche camp. "I can't hear what they're saying," she murmured. "You do not need to hear words to understand what is happening," Kiaha replied. "Watch how he stands. Watch where his eyes go. Watch his hands." Cassandra focused on Harrow's body language, and gradually she began to see what Kiaha meant. Harrow stood with the casual arrogance of a man who believed himself superior to everyone around him. His eyes swept the camp not with the careful attention of someone seeking to understand, but with the dismissive assessment of someone evaluating property. And his hands never strayed far from the pistol at his side. "He's not here to negotiate," she realized. "He's here to threaten." "Now you begin to see," Kiaha said approvingly. "Harrow believes that strength comes from the ability to hurt others. He has never learned the difference between fear and respect." The conversation below seemed to be growing heated. Cassandra could see gestures becoming sharper, postures becoming more rigid. One of the Comanche warriors, she recognized him as the young man who had spoken to Kiaha during the raid, had stepped closer to Harrow, his hand resting openly on his tomahawk. "Swift Eagle does not like what he is hearing," Kiaha observed. "He lost his sister in the raid on our village. He has little patience for white men who speak with forked tongues. Is he going to attack? Not while the truce flag flies. But Harrow is testing that patience, and he does not realize how thin it has become." Suddenly Harrow pointed up toward the ridge where they sat. Even across the distance, Cassandra could see his mouth moving in what looked like angry demands. "He knows we're here," she said, instinctively shrinking back from the edge. "Of course he knows. He did not come here blind." Kiaha's expression was calm, but Cassandra could see the tension in his shoulders. "He has come to demand your return, and he will threaten war if he does not get it." "Then give me to him. I'll go back. You'll what?" Kiaha turned to face her fully. "Marry him. Live with the man who burned my wife alive. Pretend you never heard the truth about what he has done." "I don't know." The words burst out of Cassandra before she could stop them. "I don't know what to believe anymore. Everything I thought I knew about my life, about the people I trusted, it's all falling apart." "Good," Kiaha said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "Truth often requires the destruction of comfortable illusions." "But what if you're wrong? What if there's some explanation, some misunderstanding? What if the sun rises in the west tomorrow?" Kiaha shook his head. "Some truths are written in blood, Cassandra. They cannot be explained away with words." Below them, the confrontation was escalating. Harrow had stepped closer to Swift Eagle, his voice raised enough that Cassandra could hear the anger in it, even if she couldn't make out words. The cavalry officer was trying to intervene, placing himself between the two men with obvious concern. "This is going to end badly," Cassandra murmured. "Yes," Kiaha agreed, "but not in the way Harrow expects." As if summoned by his words, a new group of riders appeared at the canyon entrance. But these weren't soldiers or settlers. They were Comanche warriors, paint fresh on their faces, weapons ready. Cassandra counted at least 30 of them, and more were still coming. Where did they come from? "They have been watching since before dawn," Kiaha said with satisfaction. "Harrow thought he was clever bringing soldiers to threaten us. He did not think we might be equally clever in our preparations." The arrival of the war party changed everything below. The cavalry soldiers drew their weapons, but they were hopelessly outnumbered. Harrow's confident posture faltered as he realized his position had become untenable. "He's trapped," Cassandra said. "He has trapped himself," Kiaha corrected. "Pride and arrogance are snares that catch only those who set them." The standoff below stretched taut as a bowstring. Cassandra could see Swift Eagle speaking rapidly to what must be the leader of the newly arrived warriors, his gestures sharp with anger. Harrow was backing toward his horse, his hand now openly on his pistol grip. "They're going to kill him. Cassandra realized. Perhaps, Kiaha said calmly, or perhaps he will finally learn what it means to be powerless. But even as he spoke, Harrow was mounting his horse. The cavalry officer shouted something to his men, and suddenly the small party was spurring their horses towards the canyon entrance. The Comanche warriors moved to intercept them, but Harrow's group had the advantage of surprise and desperation. "They're running," Cassandra said, watching the chase unfold below. "Running to bring back more soldiers." Kiaha said, his expression grim. "This was never about rescuing you, Cassandra. This was about gathering intelligence for a larger attack." The truth of his words hit her like a physical blow. "He used me. He used my kidnapping as an excuse to scout your defenses. Now you understand the mind of Ezekiel Harrow," Kiaha said. "He sees everything and everyone as tools to be used for his purposes." They watched as Harrow's party escaped the canyon, pursued by Comanche warriors who deliberately let them go. It was a message Cassandra realized: we could have killed you, but we chose not to. This time. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we prepare for war," Kiaha said simply. "Harrow will return with every soldier he can gather, and he will try to finish what he started 3 summers ago. And me." Kiaha studied her face for a long moment. "That depends. Are you ready to choose a side, Cassandra Wells? Or are you still hoping to remain neutral in a war between truth and lies?" Before she could answer, Swift Eagle appeared at the top of the trail, his face painted for war, his breathing hard from the climb. He spoke rapidly to Kiaha in Comanche, his tone urgent. Kiaha's expression darkened as he listened. When Swift Eagle finished, Kiaha turned to Cassandra with something like pity in his eyes. "What is it?" she asked, dreading the answer. "Swift Eagle followed Harrow's trail for several miles," Kiaha said quietly. "Long enough to see where he went after leaving here." "Where?" "To your father's store," Kiaha said. "Where he met with Marcus Wells in the back room behind closed doors." The words hit Cassandra like a physical blow, driving the breath from her lungs. "No, that doesn't mean anything. They're business partners, they—" Swift Eagle listened at the window. Kiaha continued relentlessly. He heard enough to understand their conversation even with his limited English. What did he hear? Kiaha was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was filled with a compassion that somehow made the words even worse. "He heard your father agree to help Harrow convince the territorial governor that this entire region needs to be cleared of hostile Indians for the safety of settlers," Kiaha said. "He heard them discuss how much compensation Marcus would receive for the loss of his daughter to savage raiders." Cassandra felt the world spin around her. "Compensation for my loss? Your father believes you are already dead," Kiaha said gently, "and he is being paid very well to help Harrow use your death to justify a war that will clear the last Indians from land Harrow wants to claim." The betrayal was complete, devastating, and undeniable. Her father, the man who had raised her, protected her, claimed to love her, was profiting from her supposed death, while helping to plan the destruction of the people who had actually shown her kindness. "I need to see him," Cassandra said, her voice barely a whisper. "I need to hear him deny it." "That can be arranged," Kiaha said. "But first, you need to understand that going back means stepping into a trap that has been set with your life as bait." "I don't care." "I do." The words came out with surprising intensity, and Kiaha seemed as surprised by them as Cassandra was. "Your life has value beyond its usefulness to men like Harrow and your father." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, a recognition, a connection that went deeper than the circumstances that had brought them together. For a moment, the war paint and cultural differences fell away, and Cassandra saw just a man who had lost everything and was trying to protect what little remained. "Why?" she asked. "Why do you care what happens to me?" Kiaha was quiet for so long that she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible above the wind. "Because you remind me that not all losses are permanent," he said. "Because you listen to truth even when it hurts. Because," he paused, struggling with words, "because Ayana would have liked you." The admission hung between them like a bridge across an impossible chasm. Cassandra felt tears burning her eyes again, but this time they weren't tears of fear or confusion. They were tears of recognition, of understanding that something fundamental had shifted in the space between one heartbeat and the next. "What do we do?" she asked. "We go back to Cedar Ridge," Kiaha said, rising and offering her his hand. "But we go as allies, not as captor and prisoner. We go to face the lies together, and we go prepared for the consequences of truth." Cassandra took his hand, feeling the warmth and strength of his fingers as he helped her to her feet. Below them, the Comanche camp was already transforming as warriors prepared for the conflict to come. But here on this windswept ledge, two people from different worlds had found something worth fighting for. The education, in truth, was complete. Now came the harder lesson, learning to live with what that truth demanded of them. The journey back to Cedar Ridge took 2 days, but it felt like a lifetime. Lifetime to Cassandra as she rode beside Kiaha through terrain that seemed both familiar and utterly foreign. Everything looked different now. The rolling hills she had known since childhood appeared more rugged, more dangerous, as if the land itself had been transformed by the weight of truth she now carried. The small party moved carefully, avoiding the main trails and keeping to hidden paths that spoke of generations of knowledge about this country. Kiaha had insisted on bringing only a handful of warriors, Swift Eagle, an older man called Gray Fox, whose weathered face held the wisdom of countless battles, and 2 younger braves whose names Cassandra had learned were Running Bear and Stone Wolf. They moved like shadows across the landscape, their horses' hooves making barely a whisper of sound on the rocky ground. "You're certain about this?" Gray Fox had asked Kiaha, in English clearly for Cassandra's benefit, before they left the canyon. "Taking her back to her people when we know it is a trap. Sometimes the only way through a trap is to spring it deliberately." Kiaha had replied, his dark eyes holding secrets Cassandra was only beginning to understand, and sometimes the bait becomes the hunter. Now, as they crested a ridge that overlooked the familiar buildings of Cedar Ridge in the distance, Cassandra felt her heart hammering against her ribs. From here, she could see her father's store, the church where she had planned to be married, the mayor's grand house on the hill, where Ezekiel Harrow held court like some frontier king. Everything looked exactly as she had left it just 3 days ago, but she felt like a different person entirely. "You still have time to change your mind," Kiaha said quietly, his horse drawing alongside hers. "We could turn back now, find another way to expose Harrow's crimes." Cassandra shook her head, though her hands trembled slightly on the reins. "No, I need to see my father's face when I tell him what I know. I need to hear him try to deny it. And if he does not deny it, if he admits his part in Harrow's schemes..." The question hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Cassandra had been asking herself the same thing for 2 days, and she still didn't have an answer that satisfied her. "Then I'll know where I stand," she said finally. "And more importantly, he'll know where I stand." Swift Eagle, who had been scouting ahead, returned at a gallop, his face grim beneath its paint. He spoke rapidly to Kiaha in Comanche, gesturing toward the town below. "What is it?" Cassandra asked, though she could guess from the young warrior's expression that the news wasn't good. "Soldiers," Kiaha said, his jaw tightening. "More than Swift Eagle has ever seen in one place. Harrow has been busy since our last meeting." Cassandra shaded her eyes and looked more carefully at the town. Now she could see them, blue uniforms moving through the streets, horses picketed near the church, the glint of sunlight on weapons. There had to be at least 100 soldiers down there, maybe more. He's turning Cedar Ridge into an armed camp, she realized. But why so many? Even if he plans to attack your people, he wouldn't need— Unless he plans to attack more than just our band, Gray Fox said grimly. A force that size could clear every Indian village within 100 miles. The implications hit Cassandra like a physical blow. That's what he's planning, isn't it? Not just revenge for your raid, but a complete war of extermination. Using your supposed death as justification, Kiaha confirmed. The grieving father demanding justice, the mayor forced to act to protect his citizens from savage killers. But I'm not dead. The words came out flat, stating the obvious, but Cassandra felt the weight of a terrible understanding settling over her. That's the problem, isn't it? As long as I'm alive, I can contradict their story. Now you begin to understand why this was always going to end in violence, Kiaha said. Harrow cannot afford to let you live, not after what you have seen and heard. They sat their horses in silence for a moment, watching the anthill activity of the occupied town below. Cassandra could see civilians going about their business, but there was a tension in their movements, a careful way they avoided getting too close to the soldiers. Fear had come to Cedar Ridge, and it was wearing a uniform. There, Swift Eagle said, suddenly pointing toward the main street. The white chief comes. Cassandra followed his gaze and saw a familiar figure emerging from the mayor's house, Ezekiel Harrow himself, resplendent in a dark suit that spoke of wealth and authority. Even from this distance she could see the confidence in his stride, the way other men deferred to him as he passed. He was holding court in the street, gesturing grandly as he spoke to a group of soldiers and civilians. Giving orders, Gray Fox observed, or perhaps telling lies. With men like that, it is often the same thing. We need to get closer, Cassandra said. I need to hear what he's saying. Too dangerous, Kiaha replied immediately. With this many soldiers, they're not looking for a woman in Comanche clothing riding with a war party, Cassandra interrupted. They're looking for a helpless victim who's either dead or being held captive somewhere. I could walk right into town and they'd never suspect. Absolutely not. The flat refusal in Kiaha's voice surprised her with its intensity. She turned to study his face, seeing something there that made her heart skip a beat. You're afraid for me, she realized. I am afraid of what losing you would do to my people's cause, he said, but the words lacked conviction. That's not what I meant, and you know it. Their eyes met, and in that moment, the careful distance they had maintained crumbled like a dam in flood season. The attraction that had been building between them, the connection that went deeper than circumstances or necessity, lay exposed between them like a raw nerve. Cassandra. Kiaha's voice was rough with emotion. He was clearly struggling to control. I know, she said quietly. I feel it too. Gray Fox cleared his throat pointedly, reminding them that they were not alone. Perhaps this conversation is better saved for after we deal with more immediate concerns. Heat flooded Cassandra's cheeks, but she didn't look away from Kiaha's face. The immediate concern is getting close enough to gather information we can use against Harrow, and the best way to do that is for me to go into town alone. I will not risk your life for information we can gather other ways. What other ways? Cassandra challenged. Your warriors are painted for war, Kiaha. They can't exactly stroll through town asking questions. But I'm supposed to be the grieving victim everyone is rallying to avenge. I could learn things you never could. Stone Wolf, who had been silent until now, spoke up in halting English. The woman speaks wisdom. Sometimes the best weapon is the one the enemy does not see coming. See, Cassandra said, even your own men agree with me. My men do not have to live with the consequences if something happens to you, Kiaha snapped. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Cassandra felt her breath catch as she understood what he was really saying. And you do, she asked softly. Kiaha's expression was answer enough. The proud, controlled warrior she had come to know looked suddenly vulnerable, as if the admission had cost him something precious. "Ayanna has been dead for 3 years," he said quietly. "I thought I had buried the part of me that could care for another person with her. I thought I was done with feelings that make a man weak. Caring doesn't make you weak. It does when it clouds your judgment. It does when it makes you hesitate at the moment when decisiveness could save lives. Or when it gives you something worth fighting for beyond revenge," Cassandra countered. "Ayanna is gone, Kiaha. I'm sorry for that, sorrier than I can express. But I'm here and I'm alive and I'm choosing to help you because it's the right thing to do. You are choosing to help because you are angry at your father and betrayed by the man you were meant to marry." "Maybe that's how it started," Cassandra admitted, "but it's not why I'm still here." The intensity of her own words surprised her. When had this become about more than justice or revenge? When had this Comanche warrior, this man from a world so different from her own, become someone she couldn't imagine losing? "This is madness," Kiaha said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Yes," Cassandra agreed, "but sometimes madness is the only sane response to an insane world." Before he could argue further, she was swinging down from her horse. "I'm going into town. You can either help me plan this properly, or you can try to stop me and waste time we don't have." "Cassandra, I'm not Ayanna," she said firmly. "I'm not fragile and I'm not helpless. I've seen what Harrow is capable of, and I've chosen my side. Trust me to fight my own battles." The words seemed to hit Kiaha like a physical blow. For a moment his careful control cracked completely, and she saw the raw pain underneath the guilt of a man who had failed to protect someone he loved, the fear of facing that failure again. "If something happens to you, then you'll make sure my death means something," Cassandra finished. "Just like you did with Ayanna's death. But I'm not planning to die today, and I'm not planning to let Harrow win." Gray Fox had been listening to this exchange with the patient expression of an elder watching children sort out adult problems. Now he spoke up quietly. "The sun grows short, and the town will be harder to approach after dark," he said. "If the woman is determined to do this thing, we should plan it properly." Kiaha closed his eyes for a moment, clearly wrestling with himself. When he opened them again, his expression had hardened into something Cassandra recognized, the look of a war leader making a decision he didn't like but couldn't avoid. "Very well," he said, "but we do this my way. No unnecessary risks, no heroic gestures. You go in, you listen, you come out, nothing more." "Agreed," Cassandra said, though they both knew the promise meant little once she was inside the town. They spent the next hour planning her approach. The clothes she had been wearing when captured were long gone, replaced by the practical buckskin dress grandmother Ituha had given her. Gray Fox produced a torn and dirty white woman's dress from his pack spoils from some previous raid, though he didn't elaborate on its provenance. "You will be a survivor," Kiaha explained as Cassandra changed behind a screen of bushes, escaped from captivity desperate to reach safety, disheveled enough to be believable, but not so damaged that people will ask too many questions about how you got free. When she emerged, the transformation was remarkable. The buckskin dress was gone, replaced by the torn calico that made her look exactly like what she was supposed to be, a woman who had endured days of captivity and somehow managed to escape. Swift Eagle had even provided mud and berry juice to simulate bruises and scratches. "How do I look?" she asked. "Like someone who has been through hell," Kiaha said, his voice tight with emotion. "Perfect," Cassandra replied, though she caught the pain in his eyes. "I'll be back before sunset." "You had better be," he said, "because if you are not, I will come looking for you, and I will not be subtle about it." The threat was delivered in a conversational tone, but Cassandra didn't doubt he meant every word. The walk into town took longer than expected. Cassandra had to approach carefully, using every bit of cover available to avoid the cavalry patrols that seemed to be everywhere. By the time she reached the outskirts of Cedar Ridge, the sun was well past its zenith, and her nerves were stretched taut as fiddle strings. The first person to spot her was Mrs. Henderson, the minister's wife, who was hanging laundry behind the parsonage. The woman's scream of shock echoed through the afternoon air like a gunshot. Cassandra, oh my lord, Cassandra Wells. Within minutes, Cassandra found herself surrounded by townspeople, all talking at once, reaching out to touch her as if to confirm she was real. The attention was overwhelming, but she forced herself to play the part. "Please," she gasped, allowing real exhaustion to color her voice. I need to see my father." "Get the doctor," someone shouted. "Where have you been?" demanded Sheriff Patterson, pushing through the crowd with official authority. "How did you escape? Where are the savages who took you?" I don't know." Cassandra stammered, the lies coming easier than she had expected. "There was a storm and I ran. I've been hiding in the wilderness for days." It was a thin story, but people seemed eager to believe it. She was the miracle they had been hoping for, the happy ending to a tragedy that had shaken their small community to its core. "Your father will be so relieved," Mrs. Henderson gushed, taking Cassandra's arm. "He's been beside himself with grief. We all thought—" "Where is he?" Cassandra asked. "At the store, I believe." "Oh, but you should see the doctor first. You look half-dead, child." "I need to see my father," Cassandra insisted. "Please." The crowd moved with her through the streets like a living thing, gathering more people as word spread of her miraculous return. Cassandra caught glimpses of soldiers watching from doorways and street corners, their expressions curious but not alarmed. She was exactly what she appeared to be, a rescued victim, not a threat. The general store looked exactly as she had left it, down to the boarded-up window where Kiaha's warrior had broken through. But when she pushed open the door, the familiar smell of leather and tobacco and dry goods hit her like a physical blow. This had been home for 19 years, the center of her world, the place where she had felt safest. Now it felt like walking into a stranger's house. "Father," she called out. Marcus Wells emerged from the back room, and the sight of him stopped Cassandra cold. He looked like he had aged years in the few days since she had seen him. His hair was disheveled, his clothes wrinkled as if he had slept in them, and his eyes held a haunted quality that spoke of sleepless nights and guilty consciences. When he saw her, the transformation was instantaneous. The haggard stranger vanished, replaced by the loving father she remembered. "Cassie." He rushed to her, enveloping her in an embrace that smelled of whiskey and desperation. "Oh God, Cassie, I thought you were dead. I thought I'd never see you again." For a moment, Cassandra allowed herself to sink into the familiar comfort of her father's arms. This was the man who had raised her, who had read her bedtime stories and taught her to count money, and defended her against anyone who suggested she was too headstrong for her own good. But even as she returned his embrace, she found herself listening for the lies underneath the relief. "I'm alive, Father," she said quietly, "but I need to tell you what happened." "Later," Marcus said, pulling back to study her face. "First, we need to get you cleaned up, fed, examined by the doctor. There will be time for stories later." "No, Father, there needs to be time for truth now." Something in her tone made him step back, his expression shifting from relief to wariness. "Cassie, what's wrong? What did they do to you?" Before she could answer, the store's bell chimed, and Ezekiel Harrow himself walked through the door. He was every bit as handsome as she remembered, every bit as confident and charming. But now Cassandra could see what she had missed. Before the coldness behind his smile, the calculation in his eyes, the way he assessed her like a problem to be solved. "Miss Wells," he said smoothly, removing his hat with perfect gentility. "Thank God you're safe. The entire territory has been searching for you." "Mr. Harrow," Cassandra replied, forcing herself to smile. "How kind of you to be concerned." Concerned, Harrow moved closer, and Cassandra caught the predatory grace in his movements. "My dear, I've moved heaven and earth to find you. Every soldier in Texas has been looking for the woman I hope to make my wife." The possessiveness in his tone made her skin crawl, but she kept her expression neutral. "That's very flattering. Where have you been?" Harrow asked, his voice casual but his eyes sharp. "How did you manage to escape from the savages who took you?" There it was, the first test. Cassandra met his gaze steadily, letting a little of her real exhaustion show through. "I'm not entirely sure," she said. "They kept me for several days, moving from place to place. There was a storm 2 nights ago, and in the confusion, I managed to slip away. I've been wandering ever since, trying to find my way home." "Several days," Harrow repeated thoughtfully, "and in all that time they didn't harm you." The question was delicately phrased, but its meaning was clear. Cassandra felt heat rise in her cheeks, not from embarrassment but from anger at the assumption underlying his words. "I was frightened," she said carefully. "But no, they didn't harm me in the way you're suggesting." "Fascinating," Harrow murmured. "Most unusual behavior for Comanche raiders. They're not typically known for their restraint with white women." "Maybe I was lucky," Cassandra replied, though every word felt like walking on glass. "Yes," Harrow agreed, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Very lucky indeed." Marcus had been listening to this exchange with growing agitation. Now he stepped forward, placing himself protectively between Cassandra and Harrow. "Ezekiel, surely these questions can wait," he said. "My daughter has been through a terrible ordeal. She needs rest, not an interrogation." "Of course," Harrow said smoothly. "Forgive me, Miss Wells. It's just that any information you can provide about your captors could be invaluable in preventing future attacks." "I understand," Cassandra said, "but honestly, I don't think I could tell you much that would be useful. I was kept blindfolded most of the time, and I don't speak their language." It was another lie, but a necessary one. She needed time to think, to plan her next move. She needed to understand exactly how much Harrow suspected before she revealed her hand. "Well," Harrow said after a moment, "the important thing is that you're safe, though I have to say your timing is rather unfortunate." "Unfortunate." Harrow's expression grew grave, taking on the practiced solemnity of a politician delivering bad news. "I'm afraid your ordeal has forced us to take certain defensive measures. The Comanche raid that took you was the final straw for the territorial government. Governor Mitchell has authorized a comprehensive campaign to remove the Indian threat from this region permanently." Cassandra felt her blood turn to ice. "What kind of campaign?" "Complete pacification," Harrow said with satisfaction. "Every hostile band within 100 miles will be relocated to the reservation by force, if necessary. The days of savage raids on innocent settlers are coming to an end." "But surely," Cassandra said carefully, "if the raids were about more than just random violence, surely there might be negotiations, treaties." Harrow's laugh was sharp as breaking glass. "Negotiations with savages who steal innocent women from their homes? I think not, my dear. Some problems can only be solved with overwhelming force." "Ezekiel's right," Marcus said, though his voice lacked conviction. "These raids have to stop. People can't live in fear." "But what if—" Cassandra pressed her heart, hammering. "What if there were reasons for the raids? What if the Indians had grievances that could be addressed without bloodshed?" Both men stared at her as if she had spoken in a foreign language. It was Harrow who recovered first, his politician's smile slipping back into place. "My dear Cassandra," he said with patronizing gentleness, "I understand that your ordeal may have confused your thinking somewhat. It's not uncommon for captives to develop sympathetic feelings toward their captors, but you must understand there can be no reasoning with savages. They understand only strength. And you would know this, how—" The question slipped out before Cassandra could stop it. Harrow's eyes sharpened. "I beg your pardon. I mean," Cassandra said quickly, "have you spent much time dealing with the Comanche? Do you speak their language, understand their customs?" "I don't need to speak with rabid dogs to understand they need to be put down," Harrow replied, his mask of civility slipping slightly. The casual cruelty of the statement hit Cassandra like a slap. In those few words, she heard the voice of the man who had burned Ayanna alive, who had destroyed an entire village to claim land he wanted. "That seems rather harsh," she said carefully. "Does it?" Harrow stepped closer, and Cassandra caught the smell of expensive cologne that couldn't quite mask something darker underneath. "Tell me, Miss Wells, in your days of captivity, did you happen to learn the name of the warrior who led the raid on our town?" The question was casual, conversational, but Cassandra could feel the trap hidden beneath it. I'm not sure. I heard names, but I don't know what they meant." "Perhaps Kiaha. Did you hear that name?" Cassandra let her expression grow confused, as if trying to remember. "Maybe it sounds familiar, but everything was so frightening." "Kiaha," Harrow said with satisfaction, "is the most dangerous Comanche war leader in Texas, a savage who has killed dozens of innocent settlers, a monster who needs to be stopped before he can do more damage." "If he's so dangerous," Cassandra said, "isn't it strange that he let me go?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Harrow's expression grew very still, very careful. "Yes," he said slowly, "very strange indeed." The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken accusations and carefully hidden truths. Cassandra could feel both men studying her, Marcus with confusion and growing concern, Harrow with the predatory focus of a hunter who had caught an unexpected scent. "Well," Harrow said, finally, his smile returning, but colder than before, "I'm sure you're exhausted from your ordeal. Perhaps we should let you rest." "That's very thoughtful," Cassandra replied, though every instinct screamed that letting him leave now would be a mistake. "There is one more thing," Harrow said, pausing at the door. "The territorial governor is sending a special investigator to document the atrocities committed during these raids. He'll want to speak with you, get your testimony for the official record." "Of course," Cassandra said. "I'll be happy to tell him everything I remember." "Excellent," Harrow said. "He should arrive tomorrow morning. I'll make sure he finds time to speak with you." After he left, the store felt smaller, as if his presence had sucked all the air from the room. Marcus began bustling around, clearly uncomfortable with the tension that lingered in Harrow's wake. "I should close up early today," he said, not meeting Cassandra's eyes. "Give us time to talk properly." "Yes," Cassandra agreed. "I think we need to have a very long talk indeed." But even as she said it, she could see the fear creeping into her father's expression. He knew something was wrong, knew she had learned things he didn't want her to know. The question was whether he would try to deny it or finally tell her the truth. Outside, the sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon, and Cassandra knew that Kiaha would be watching for her return. She had learned what she came to learn, but the knowledge sat in her stomach like a stone. Tomorrow, Harrow's investigator would arrive. Tomorrow, the lies would become official, written into territorial records as justification for the war to come. And somewhere out there, Kiaha and his people were preparing for a battle they couldn't win through force of arms alone. The trap was closing just as Kiaha had predicted. But now Cassandra understood that she wasn't just the bait, she was the key to springing it in a way Harrow would never expect. The weight of unspoken truths pressed down on the small store like a physical presence as Marcus Wells turned the sign to closed and drew the curtains. Cassandra watched her father's every movement, noting the slight tremor in his hands, the way he avoided meeting her eyes, the defensive set of his shoulders. This was not the confident merchant she had known all her life, but a man carrying secrets that were eating him alive from the inside. "Father," she said quietly, settling into the chair beside the counter where she had spent countless hours as a child watching him work. "We need to talk." "Yes," Marcus agreed, though his voice cracked slightly on the word. "I suppose we do." He poured himself a generous measure of whiskey from the bottle he kept hidden behind the grain sacks, his hands shaking just enough to make the liquid slosh against the glass. When he offered the bottle to Cassandra, she shook her head. "I need a clear head for this conversation." Marcus took a long drink, then set the glass down with careful precision. "What do you want to know?" "Everything," Cassandra said simply. "I want to know about your business dealings with Harrow. I want to know about the meetings after dark, the unmarked shipments, the extra money that appears in our accounts after his visits." "Cassie," Marcus began, but she cut him off with a gesture. "I want to know why a Comanche warrior told me that you and Harrow have been planning to use my death to justify a war that will clear every Indian from land Harrow wants to claim." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He went pale, his whiskey glass slipping from nerveless fingers to shatter on the floor. The sound of breaking glass seemed unnaturally loud in the small space. "How could you possibly know about—" He stopped himself, but it was too late. "So it's true," Cassandra said, her voice steady, despite the pain blooming in her chest. "You really are part of Harrow's schemes." Marcus sank into his chair behind the counter, suddenly looking every one of his 53 years. "It's not what you think." "Then tell me what it is." For a long moment, Marcus stared at the broken glass on the floor, as if the shards might somehow rearrange themselves into a pattern that would make everything make sense. "It started small," he said finally. "Just business, legitimate business. Harrow needed supplies for his ranch hands' goods for the trading posts he was establishing. I was struggling to keep this store afloat, and he was offering cash payment for large orders. And then he started asking for other things, information about which homesteaders were struggling financially, which ranchers might be willing to sell their land cheaply. He said he was trying to help consolidate holdings, make the territory more stable for everyone." Cassandra felt a chill run down her spine. "He was mapping out targets." "I didn't realize it at the time," Marcus said desperately. "I thought he was just a successful businessman looking for opportunities. The money he paid me kept this store running, kept food on our table." "What else?" Marcus's shoulders sagged further. "He asked me to store certain items for him, weapons mostly. He said they were for protection, that with all the Indian troubles, people needed to be able to defend themselves. Weapons that ended up in the hands of the men who attacked Kiaha's village." "I don't know," Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Maybe, probably." The admission hung between them like a death sentence. Cassandra felt something fundamental break inside her chest, a connection that had sustained her for 19 years, finally snapping under the weight of betrayal. "And my supposed death," she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "How much is Harrow paying you for that convenient tragedy?" Marcus flinched as if she had struck him. $5,000, he said. "Compensation for my loss," he called it. "Money to help me start over somewhere else, away from the painful memories." $5,000. Cassandra repeated the number as if it were a foreign phrase she couldn't quite understand. "That's what I'm worth to you. That's the price of your daughter's life." "You don't understand," Marcus said desperately. "When the raid happened, when I saw you taken, I thought you were already dead. Harrow said the Comanche never let white women live, that it was just a matter of time before they found your body. The money wasn't for your death, it was for my grief. But you knew I might still be alive. You knew there was a chance I could escape, could come back, and you took his money anyway." "I needed the money." The words burst out of Marcus like a dam breaking. "This store is failing, Cassie. Has been for months. The big supply companies in Austin are undercutting my prices, and the railroad is making places like Cedar Ridge irrelevant. Without Harrow's payments, we would have lost everything. So you sold your soul instead." "I sold my silence," Marcus corrected. "I agreed not to ask too many questions about his business dealings. I agreed to support his efforts to bring law and order to the territory." "Law and order," Cassandra repeated bitterly. "Is that what you call burning villages and murdering pregnant women?" Marcus went even paler. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about what really happened to Kiaha's people. Cassandra said, rising from her chair to pace the small confines of the store. I'm talking about the village Harrow destroyed 3 years ago, the families he slaughtered to claim land that was never his to take. That's impossible. Harrow wouldn't. He's not what father, not capable of murder, not willing to kill anyone who stands between him and what he wants. Cassandra stopped pacing to face her father directly. I've seen the proof. I've heard the testimonies. I know what kind of man you've been helping. Proof. Marcus's voice was barely a whisper. What proof? Before Cassandra could answer, the sound of hoofbeats in the street outside made them both freeze. Through a gap in the curtains, Cassandra could see soldiers riding past their uniforms, dark blue in the gathering twilight. The patrols are increasing, Marcus observed nervously. Harrow says there might be another raid. There might be, Cassandra agreed, but not the kind he's expecting. She moved to the window, peering out at the street that had once felt like the safest place in the world. Now it looked like an occupied territory, with armed men on every corner and fear creeping through the shadows. I have to ask you something, Father, she said without turning around, and I need you to answer me honestly. What? When Harrow's investigator arrives tomorrow, what exactly are you planning to tell him about my captivity? The silence stretched so long that Cassandra finally turned to look at her father. Marcus was staring at his hands, his face a map of guilt and fear and desperate calculation. He wants me to say that you were damaged, Marcus said finally, harmed in ways that would make it impossible for you to marry to have a normal life. He says it will make the case for military action more compelling. More compelling than what? Than the truth. Which is, Marcus looked up at her with eyes that held the weight of terrible knowledge. That you escaped relatively unharmed, that your captors treated you better than white men would have treated a Comanche woman in the same situation, that maybe, just maybe, this whole conflict could be resolved without bloodshed if someone was willing to try negotiation instead of extermination. The admission hung in the air between them like a bridge across an impossible chasm. For a moment, Cassandra saw a glimpse of the man her father had once been, the one who had taught her to judge people by their actions rather than their appearance, who had instilled in her a sense of fairness that now made his betrayal so devastating. You know it's wrong, she said softly. You know Harrow's war will destroy innocent people. I know, Marcus whispered, but I also know what will happen to me if I cross him now. He has enough evidence of my involvement to have me hanged for supplying weapons to raiders. He says if I don't support his version of events, he'll make sure I'm blamed for every death in every Indian raid in the past 2 years. So you choose to save yourself and damn everyone else. I choose to save my daughter. Marcus exploded, his carefully maintained composure finally cracking. Do you think Harrow will let you live once you've served his purpose? Do you think he'll allow a witness to his crimes to walk around free? The words hit Cassandra like ice water. What do you mean? I mean, Marcus said heavily, that Harrow has already made it clear what will happen if your testimony doesn't match his expectations. You'll suffer a tragic relapse from your ordeal, a delayed reaction to the trauma that will prove too much for your delicate constitution. He's planning to kill me. He's planning to solve his problems permanently, Marcus corrected. And the only way I can protect you is to play along until we can figure out how to get you away from here safely. For the first time since entering the store, Cassandra felt a flicker of the love she had always known from her father. Buried under layers of greed and cowardice and moral compromise, there was still a man who wanted to protect his daughter. There is another way, she said quietly. What way? We tell the truth, all of it. We expose Harrow's crimes and let justice take its course. Marcus laughed bitterly. Justice? Whose justice? Harrow owns the territorial governor, half the judges in Texas, and every newspaper editor between here and Austin. What truth do you think will survive against that kind of power? The kind of truth that comes with proof, Cassandra said. Documentation, witnesses, evidence that can't be dismissed or ignored. What kind of evidence? Before Cassandra could answer, a soft tapping came at the back door of the store. Both father and daughter froze, listening to the rhythm of the knocks. 3 short, 2 long, 3 short, again. Who could that be? Marcus whispered. Cassandra knew exactly who it was. The signal was one Kiaha had taught her during their journey back to town, a way of identifying friends in hostile territory. "Stay here," she said, moving toward the back of the store. "Cassie, wait." But she was already at the door, lifting the bar and pulling it open just wide enough to see the familiar figure waiting in the alley beyond. Kiaha stood in the shadows, his war paint fresh, his eyes alert for any sign of danger. "You are late," he said softly. "I needed more time to get information." Cassandra replied, glancing back to make sure her father couldn't hear. "Are the others with you, close enough to help if needed?" Kiaha's gaze moved past her to scan the interior of the store. "Did you learn what we need to know? More than I wanted to." Cassandra quickly filled him in on her conversations with both Harrow and her father, watching his expression grow darker with each revelation. "So tomorrow the lies become official," he said when she finished, "unless we do something to stop it. What do you suggest?" Cassandra took a deep breath, knowing that what she was about to propose would change everything between them, would make her as much of an outlaw as any Comanche warrior. "I suggest we give the investigator something more interesting to investigate than my supposed trauma," she said. "I suggest we give him Harrow's real crimes, with enough evidence to make the charges stick." Kiaha studied her face in the dim light. "You are certain about this? Once you take this step, there will be no going back to your old life." "My old life was built on lies," Cassandra replied. "I'm ready for something real. Even if that reality includes war, even if it means choosing between your people and mine." "It means choosing between right and wrong," Cassandra corrected. "Between justice and the kind of expedient cruelty that destroys everything good in the world." For a moment they stood in the doorway looking at each other, two people from different worlds who had found something worth fighting for together. Then Kiaha nodded. "What do you need me to do?" "I need you to bring me the evidence you have against Harrow. Documents, witnesses, anything that proves what really happened to your village. And I need you to trust me with the lives of your people." "I already do," Kiaha said simply. The words carried a weight that went far beyond the immediate crisis. Cassandra felt her heart skip a beat as she understood what he was really saying. "Kiaha, I know," he said quietly. "This is not the time or place. But when this is over, when Harrow has faced justice and our peoples can live in peace, there are things we need to discuss." "Yes," Cassandra agreed, her voice barely a whisper. "There are." A sound from inside the store reminded them both that they were not alone. Cassandra glanced back to see her father standing in the doorway between the main store and the back room, his face pale with shock. "Cassie," Marcus called out uncertainly, "who are you talking to?" There was no hiding it now. Cassandra stepped back from the door, allowing her father to see Kiaha standing in the alley beyond. "Father," she said quietly, "I'd like you to meet Kiaha, the man whose wife and unborn child were murdered by your business partner." Marcus went even paler, if that was possible. His hand moved instinctively toward the rifle above the counter, but Kiaha made no threatening moves. Instead, he stepped into the store with the same calm dignity he had shown from their first meeting. "Mr. Wells," he said in his accented English, "your daughter has told me much about you." "You're him," Marcus whispered taut. "You're the war chief they're all afraid of." "I am a man seeking justice for murdered loved ones," Kiaha corrected. "Nothing more, nothing less." "Justice," Marcus repeated, as if the word were foreign to him. "The same justice you denied my people when you helped Harrow obtain the weapons that burned my village," Kiaha said. "The same justice you continue to deny by supporting his lies." Marcus looked between his daughter and the Comanche warrior, clearly struggling to process this new reality. "Cassie, what have you done?" "I've chosen a side," she replied. "The same choice you made when you took Harrow's money and agreed to his schemes. But he's a savage. He's killed innocent people. So has Harrow," Kiaha said calmly. "The difference is that my people kill in war to protect our families and our land. Harrow kills for profit to increase his wealth and power." "That's not the same thing." "Is it not?" Kiaha moved further into the store, his presence somehow making the familiar space feel smaller. "Tell me, Mr. Wells, how many of the people I have killed were innocent? How many were not soldiers or raiders threatening my people?" Marcus opened his mouth to answer, then closed it again. The truth was, he didn't know. None of them knew because they had never bothered to ask. They had simply accepted the stories they were told about savage raids and unprovoked attacks. "I thought so," Kiaha said. "You judge me by stories told by men who profit from war. I judge Harrow by the ashes of my wife's funeral pyre." The words hung in the air like smoke from that distant fire. Marcus sank into his chair, looking suddenly older than his years. "What do you want from me?" he asked. "I want you to help us stop a war that will destroy both our peoples," Kiaha said. "I want you to choose truth over convenient lies. And if I refuse, then tomorrow Harrow's investigator will write a report that justifies the extermination of every Indian in Texas," Cassandra said. "And you'll have to live with the knowledge that you could have prevented it." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands, as if they held answers to questions he had never thought to ask. "What would I have to do?" he said finally. "Help us gather evidence," Cassandra replied. "Real evidence that proves Harrow's crimes. Documents, financial records, anything that shows the connection between his business dealings and the attacks on Indian villages." "Most of that evidence is in his house," Marcus said. "In his private study. I've seen him working on ledgers there, heard him talking to his associates about territorial acquisitions." "Can you get us access?" Marcus laughed bitterly. "To Harrow's house. It's like a fortress now, with soldiers stationed at every entrance. Even if I could get in, I'd never make it out alive with stolen documents." "What about his office in town?" Kiaha asked. "The building where he conducts his official business as mayor." "Same problem," Marcus replied. "Too many guards, too much attention." Cassandra felt frustration building in her chest. They were so close to the evidence they needed, but it might as well have been on the moon for all the good it did them. "There might be another way," Marcus said slowly. "What way?" "Harrow keeps copies of his most important documents in a safe deposit box at the bank," Marcus said. "Insurance, he calls it, in case anything happens to his primary records." "How do you know this?" "Because I helped him set it up," Marcus admitted. "He needed a witness for the paperwork, someone the bank manager would trust. I signed as his business associate." Cassandra felt her pulse quicken. "Can you access the box?" "Not legally, but—" Marcus hesitated, clearly struggling with himself. "I know where the bank manager keeps the master keys, and I know the combination to the safe where they're stored." "How?" "Because George Hartwell has been my friend for 20 years, Marcus said. "And because he drinks too much and talks too freely when he's in his cups." The plan that began to form in Cassandra's mind was dangerous, probably insane, and certainly illegal. It was also their best chance of obtaining the evidence they needed to stop Harrow's war before it began. "When does the investigator arrive?" she asked. "First thing in the morning," Marcus replied. "Harrow wants to get his report filed as quickly as possible." "Then we have tonight," Kiaha said, "and we have the cover of darkness to hide our movements." "You're really asking me to rob a bank," Marcus said wonderingly. "I'm asking you to save lives," Cassandra corrected, "both white and Indian. I'm asking you to choose justice over profit for once in your life." Marcus looked at his daughter, really looked at her, and Cassandra could see him noting the changes the past few days had wrought. The frightened girl who had been taken from this store was gone, replaced by a woman who had seen the world beyond the comfortable lies of civilization and chosen to fight for something larger than herself. "You love him," Marcus said suddenly. "This Comanche warrior. You love him." The statement wasn't a question, and Cassandra didn't try to deny it. "Yes," she said simply, "I do. And he loves you." Cassandra glanced at Kiaha, seeing the answer in his eyes, even before he spoke. "I love her more than my own life," Kiaha said quietly, "which is why I would rather die than see her forced to choose between her people and mine." "So you're going to try to build a bridge," Marcus said, "between two worlds that have been at war since white men first set foot in this territory." "We're going to try to prevent a slaughter," Cassandra corrected. "What happens after that, we'll figure out when we get there." Marcus was quiet for another long moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice held a resolve that Cassandra hadn't heard in years. "All right," he said. "God help us all, but I'll do it. I'll help you get into that bank." "You're sure?" Cassandra asked. "I'm sure that I can't live with any more blood on my hands," Marcus replied. "I'm sure that I want my daughter to be proud of me again someday." "I'm already proud of you," Cassandra said, and meant it, "for choosing to do the right thing even when it's hard." As if to emphasize the difficulty of that choice, the sound of marching feet echoed in the street outside. Through the curtained windows they could see the shapes of soldiers moving in formation, their weapons glinting in the lamplight. "The garrison is being reinforced," Kiaha observed. "Harrow is preparing for war whether we stop him or not." "Then we'd better make sure we succeed," Cassandra said grimly. The die was cast. Tonight they would break into the bank and steal the evidence they needed to expose Harrow's crimes. Tomorrow they would present that evidence to the territorial investigator and pray that justice was stronger than politics. But first, they had to survive the next few hours in a town that was rapidly becoming a powder keg with a very short fuse. The clock on the bank wall read midnight when Marcus Wells inserted the stolen key into the lock of George Hartwell's office. The metallic click seemed to echo through the empty building like a gunshot, and all three conspirators froze, listening for any sign that their presence had been detected. But the only sounds were the distant murmur of voices from the saloon down the street, and the occasional clatter of hoofbeats as another cavalry patrol made its rounds. "Clear," Kiaha whispered from his position by the window, where he had been watching the street with the patient intensity of a hunter. "The next patrol won't pass for another 10 minutes. Marcus nodded, his hands trembling slightly as he pushed open the door to reveal the bank manager's private office. The room was exactly as he remembered it, neat as a pin with ledgers stacked in precise rows and a massive safe squatting in the corner like a sleeping giant. "The master keys are in there," he said, pointing toward the safe, "along with the records of every safety deposit box in the bank." Cassandra moved to the desk where an oil lamp waited, its wick trimmed and ready. She struck a match, the brief flare of light illuminating their tense faces before settling into a steady glow. "The combination?" she asked. "George's wedding anniversary," Marcus replied, already moving toward the safe. 1857-23. He told me once that it was the only date he could never afford to forget. The safe opened with a heavy chunk of metal on metal, revealing neat rows of keys hanging from numbered hooks and thick ledgers bound in leather. Marcus reached for the ledger marked Deposit Box Registry, while Kiaha gathered the keys they would need. "Box 27, Marcus murmured, running his finger down the handwritten entries. "Registered to Ezekiel Harrow, contents listed as business documents and correspondence." "That's our target," Cassandra said, though her voice carried little satisfaction. Breaking into the bank felt like crossing a line she could never uncross, stepping permanently outside the world of law and order she had known all her life. They made their way to the vault, where the safety deposit boxes were housed, a windowless room lined with numbered metal doors. Box 27 was near the bottom, requiring Kiaha to kneel as he worked the key in the lock. "It's open," he said, sliding out a metal drawer that proved to be heavier than expected. Inside were neat stacks of papers bound with ribbon, several leather-bound journals, and a small wooden box that rattled when Cassandra lifted it. She opened the box to reveal a collection of ornate brass buttons, military buttons she realized cut from the uniforms of dead soldiers. "Trophies," Kiaha said grimly, recognizing them for what they were. "Harrow keeps souvenirs of his victories." Marcus had been examining the journals, his face growing paler with each page he turned. "Sweet, merciful God," he whispered. "It's all here, every detail of every raid, every murdered family, every stolen acre of land." "What do you mean?" Cassandra asked, moving to look over his shoulder. "He's kept records." Marcus said, his voice hollow with shock. "Detailed records of every attack he's orchestrated, every village burned, every treaty broken. It's like he wanted to document his crimes for posterity." Cassandra read over his shoulder, her stomach churning as she absorbed the methodical cruelty laid out in Harrow's neat handwriting. Entry after entry described raids carried out by men in Comanche war paint attacks, designed to look like Indian violence while actually serving Harrow's land acquisition schemes. "Look at this," she said, pointing to an entry dated 3 years earlier. "The attack on the Honey Eaters village." He describes it like a business transaction, asset acquired, obstacles removed, investment secured. Kiaha had gone very still, his dark eyes fixed on the page, with an intensity that made the air around him seem to crackle with suppressed violence. "He wrote about Ayana," he said in a voice like winter wind. "He wrote about my wife's death like it was a line item in a ledger." "There's more," Marcus said, his hands shaking as he turned pages. "Financial records showing payments to territorial officials, bribes to newspaper editors, contracts with mercenaries posing as Indian raiders. They worked in urgent silence, selecting the most damning documents and making careful notes about the contents of the journals. The evidence was overwhelming, not just proof of Harrow's guilt, but a complete blueprint of corruption that reached from Cedar Ridge to the territorial capital. "This will destroy him," Cassandra said as they carefully returned the remaining documents to the box. "No one could explain away evidence this comprehensive." "If we can get it to the right people," Marcus cautioned. "Harrow has allies in high places. It won't be enough to simply present the evidence. We need to make sure it reaches someone who can't be bought or intimidated." "The territorial investigator," Kiaha suggested. "If he's legitimate." "He's not," Marcus said flatly. "I've heard Harrow talking about him. Colonel Bradley is an old friend, someone who owes his current position to Harrow's influence. He's not here to investigate anything. He's here to rubber stamp whatever story Harrow wants to tell." The revelation hit them like a bucket of cold water. Cassandra felt her heart sink as she realized the trap was even deeper than they had suspected. "Then what do we do with this?" she asked, gesturing to the stolen documents. "We find someone else," Kiaha said firmly. "Someone with the authority to act on this evidence and the integrity to see it through." "Who?" Marcus asked. "Harrow's corruption reaches everywhere. Judges, territorial officials, military commanders, they're all either bought or intimidated." Before anyone could answer, the sound of approaching hoofbeats made them all freeze. The measured cadence was different from the earlier patrols, faster, more urgent, as if the riders were responding to some emergency. Kiaha moved to the window, peering carefully through a gap in the curtains. "6 men," he reported, "coming this way fast." "Did someone see us?" Cassandra asked, her mouth suddenly dry. "I don't think so, but—" Kiaha paused, his expression growing grim. "One of them is Harrow." The name hit the room like a physical blow. Marcus went pale, his hands fumbling as he tried to stuff the stolen documents into a canvas sack. "How could he know?" Cassandra whispered. Maybe he doesn't, Kiaha said. Maybe this is routine, but we cannot take the chance. They could hear the riders pulling up outside the bank, now voices raised in urgent conversation. Through the thin walls, Harrow's voice carried clearly. I want this building searched from top to bottom, he was saying. If someone's been tampering with the safety deposit boxes, I want to know about it. How did he know? Marcus repeated Cassandra's question, his voice cracking with panic. It doesn't matter, Kiaha said, already moving toward the back of the building. What matters is getting out of here alive. But even as he spoke, they could hear boots. On the front steps, keys rattling in the lock. Someone else had access to the bank, and they were coming in. The back door, Marcus whispered, leading them toward the rear of the building. They had almost reached the exit when the sound of splintering wood echoed through the bank. Someone had given up on finding the right key and simply kicked in the front door. Search every room, Harrow's voice commanded. I want every corner examined, every shadow investigated. Kiaha reached the back door first, his hand closing on the handle just as the sound of approaching footsteps echoed from the alley beyond. They were trapped, caught between two groups of armed men with nowhere to run. The cellar, Marcus said, suddenly pointing toward a trapdoor hidden beneath a throw rug. Hartwell keeps his wine collection down there. There's another way out through the old storm drain. It wasn't much of a chance, but it was the only one they had. Kiaha pulled up the trapdoor, revealing a narrow ladder that disappeared into Stygian darkness below. The smell that rose from the opening was musty and damp, tinged with the odor of aging wine and something else less pleasant. Go, he said to Cassandra, quickly. She didn't argue, swinging her legs over the edge and beginning her descent into the unknown. Marcus followed, clutching the sack of stolen documents like a lifeline. Kiaha came last, pulling the trapdoor closed above them, just as the sound of searching footsteps reached the back of the bank. The cellar was a cramped space lined with wine racks and storage barrels. A thin stream of water ran along one wall, disappearing into what looked like a drainage tunnel, barely wide enough for a person to crawl through. That leads to the creek behind the church, Marcus whispered. It's about 50 yards of crawling, but it comes out in heavy brush, where we won't be seen. Above them they could hear boots walking across the floor, voices calling out to each other as the search continued. It was only a matter of time before someone thought to check the cellar. Move, Kiaha said, already pushing Marcus toward the tunnel entrance. The journey through the drainage pipe was a nightmare of cramped muscles and shallow breathing. The tunnel was barely large enough to accommodate a grown man, forcing them to belly crawl through inches of cold, stagnant water that soaked their clothes and chilled them to the bone. Every sound seemed amplified in the confined space, the scrape of knees against stone, the splash of hands in water, the ragged breathing of three people pushed to their physical limits. Behind them they could hear the muffled sounds of the search continuing. At one point, a beam of lantern light appeared at the tunnel entrance, and they had to freeze in absolute silence until it moved away. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, fresh air began to flow through the tunnel, carrying with it the scent of grass and trees. The exit was hidden behind a tangle of blackberry vines that had grown across the opening, creating a natural camouflage that had probably saved their lives. They emerged into a small grove of cottonwood trees behind the Methodist church, their clothes soaked and muddy, their nerves stretched to the breaking point. In the distance, they could see lanterns moving through the streets of Cedar Ridge as the search expanded beyond the bank. They know we were there, Cassandra said, wringing water from her skirt. Somehow they know. It doesn't matter how, Kiaha replied, scanning the darkness for any sign of pursuit. What matters is that we have what we came for, and we have a head start. Marcus clutched the canvas sack against his chest, its contents representing either salvation or damnation, depending on what they did next. We need to get out of town, he said. Tonight, before they realize what's missing. Where can we go? Cassandra asked. Harrow has allies everywhere, soldiers searching every road. Not everywhere, Kiaha said. My people are waiting in the canyon. We'll be safe there while we decide what to do with this evidence. But even as he spoke, they could see more lanterns appearing in the distance, a net of light tightening around the town as the search intensified. Getting to the canyon would mean crossing open country under a nearly full moon, exposed to any patrol that happened to be in the area. There's another way, Marcus said slowly. More dangerous but less obvious. What way? The old mine shaft up Devil's Ridge. It's been abandoned for years, but the tunnels go for miles underground. Some of them come out near the canyon where your people are camped. Kiaha considered this for a moment. How do you know about these tunnels? Because I helped survey them 15 years ago when the mining company first came through, Marcus replied, before they decided the ore wasn't worth the trouble of extraction. It was a risk, but no more than trying to cross open ground with half the territorial army looking for them. They made their way carefully through the back streets of Cedar Ridge, avoiding the main thoroughfares where patrols were most likely to be found. The climb up Devil's Ridge was treacherous, in the darkness, made worse by their wet clothes and exhausted state. But Marcus knew the way leading them along game trails and rocky ledges that would leave no tracks for pursuers to follow. The mine entrance was hidden behind a screen of dead timber and rusted equipment barely visible even when they were standing directly in front of it. Marcus lit a candle stub he had taken from the bank, revealing a tunnel that stretched away into impenetrable darkness. Stay close, he warned. Some of these shafts drop off without warning, and the air gets thin the deeper we go. The journey through the abandoned mine was even worse than the drainage tunnel had been. The passages branched and twisted like a maze, requiring Marcus's intimate knowledge to navigate safely. More than once they came to dead ends or vertical shafts that plunged away into bottomless darkness, but gradually the air began to freshen, carrying hints of sage and pine that spoke of the world above. When they finally emerged from a cleverly concealed exit on the far side of the ridge, dawn was painting the eastern sky in shades of gold and rose. The canyon is just over that next ridge, Kiaha said, pointing toward a line of red stone cliffs. My people will be watching for us. They had made it. Against all odds, they had obtained the evidence they needed and escaped with their lives. But as they stood on the windswept mountainside watching the sun rise over the Texas landscape, all three of them understood that the real battle was just beginning. What now? Cassandra asked, though she already knew the answer. Now we use this evidence to stop a war, Kiaha replied. We find someone with the power and integrity to act on what we've discovered. And if we can't find anyone like that, Marcus asked, then we make our stand here, Kiaha said simply. We fight for what's right, whatever the cost. As they began the final descent toward the canyon, Cassandra found herself thinking about the choice that lay ahead. In a few hours, Colonel Bradley would arrive in Cedar Ridge, expecting to interview a traumatized victim and file a report justifying military action against the Comanche. Instead, he would find an empty bank vault and a town in uproar. The evidence they carried could change everything. Expose the corruption, prevent the war, bring justice to those who had been wronged. But only if they could find a way to get it to the right people, and only if those people were willing to act on truths that powerful men wanted to keep buried. The sun climbed higher, painting the canyon walls in brilliant reds and golds as they approached the Comanche camp. Warriors emerged from concealment to escort them safely inside their painted faces, grave with understanding of what the stolen documents might mean. Grandmother Ituha was waiting by the fire, her weathered hands busy with some intricate beadwork that seemed to tell a story in colors and patterns. She looked up as they approached, her ancient eyes taking in their bedraggled appearance and the precious sack Marcus still clutched against his chest. She spoke in rapid Comanche to Kiaha, who listened carefully before translating for the others. She says the spirits have been restless all night, he reported. She says they whisper of great changes coming, of old wounds finally being healed or torn open forever. What does that mean? Cassandra asked. It means, Kiaha said, settling beside the fire with obvious exhaustion, that we are at a crossroads. What we do in the next few hours will determine the fate of both our peoples for generations to come. As if summoned by his words, Swift Eagle appeared at the edge of the firelight, his face grim with urgent news. He spoke rapidly to Kiaha, gesturing toward the canyon entrance. What is it? Cassandra demanded. Riders approaching under a flag of truce. Kiaha replied, rising to his feet with sudden tension. 3 men, one of them wearing the uniform of a territorial colonel. Bradley, Marcus said. He's found us already. No, Kiaha said, studying Swift Eagle's face as the young warrior continued his report. Not Bradley, someone else. Someone Swift Eagle doesn't recognize. They watched from the rim of the canyon as the 3 riders approached their flag of truce, stark white against the morning sky. The colonel was a tall, lean man with graying hair and the kind of weathered face that spoke of years spent in hard country. His companions were younger, clearly aides or subordinates. Should we meet with them? Cassandra asked. We have little choice, Kiaha replied. If we refuse, they'll simply bring more soldiers until we have no choice at all. The parley took place in a small meadow below the canyon rim, with warriors positioned strategically in the rocks above. The colonel dismounted first, his movements careful and deliberate, his hands deliberately kept away from his weapons. I am Colonel James Morrison, Territorial Commander for this district, he said, his voice carrying clearly in the still air. I'm looking for Miss Cassandra Wells and the Comanche war leader called Kiaha. You've found them, Kiaha replied, stepping forward with Cassandra at his side. What do you want? Colonel Morrison's eyes moved between them, taking in their obvious partnership, the way they stood together as equals rather than captor and prisoner. I want to prevent a war that will destroy both your peoples, he said simply, and I think you might have information that could help me do that. The words were so unexpected that Cassandra felt her breath catch. This wasn't the rubber stamp investigation they had expected, wasn't another corrupt official in Harrow's pocket. What kind of information? She asked carefully. The kind that proves Ezekiel Harrow has been orchestrating raids and burning villages to claim land for his own purposes, Morrison replied. The kind that shows this entire conflict has been manufactured by men who profit from war. Marcus stepped forward, still clutching the canvas sack. You know about Harrow's crimes. I suspect them, Morrison corrected. But suspicion isn't evidence. I need proof, documentation, something that will stand up in a territorial court. For a moment, the 3 conspirators exchanged glances, hardly daring to believe what they were hearing. Then Marcus held up the sack, its contents representing everything they had risked their lives to obtain. We have that proof, he said. All of it. Financial records, correspondence, detailed accounts of every raid and every murder. Everything you need to bring Harrow to justice. Colonel Morrison's eyes sharpened with interest. How did you come by this evidence? We stole it, Cassandra said simply. From Harrow's private safety deposit box, we broke into the bank and took it. That makes the evidence inadmissible in court, Morrison said. Illegally obtained materials cannot be used in prosecution. The words hit them like a physical blow. After everything they had risked, everything they had sacrificed, the evidence that could prevent a war was worthless in the eyes of the law. But, Morrison continued, illegally obtained evidence can be used to guide a legitimate investigation. If I know where to look, I can find legal ways to obtain the same information. Hope flickered back to life in Cassandra's chest. You'll investigate officially. I'll do more than that, Morrison said grimly. I'll make sure Harrow faces justice for his crimes, and I'll see that the territorial government understands exactly how this conflict really started. As he spoke, the sound of approaching horses echoed across the meadow. A large force was riding toward them, sunlight glinting off weapons and uniforms. "Harrow," Kiaha said, his hand moving to his knife. "He's found us." But Colonel Morrison was shaking his head. "Those are my men," he said. "I brought them to arrest Ezekiel Harrow on charges of conspiracy, murder, and treason against the territorial government." The cavalry force that rode into the meadow was unlike any Cassandra had ever seen. These weren't the kind of brutal Indian fighters that Harrow had been assembling, but professional soldiers under the command of an officer who understood the difference between justice and vengeance. "You have a choice to make, Miss Wells," Morrison said as his men formed ranks around the meadow. "You can come with me and testify against Harrow in a territorial court. Help me build a case that will see him hanged for his crimes. Or you can stay here with your Comanche friends and let someone else speak for the victims of his schemes." Cassandra looked at Kiaha, seeing her own thoughts reflected in his dark eyes. They had found their bridge between two worlds, their chance to build something better from the ashes of hatred and mistrust. "I'll testify," she said, "but only if you guarantee safe passage for Kiaha and his people. No reprisals, no punishment for raids that were acts of war against a man who had already declared war on them." "Agreed," Morrison said without hesitation. "The territorial government is prepared to honor existing treaties and negotiate new ones based on mutual respect rather than superior firepower." It was more than they had dared hope for, the kind of justice that Cassandra had begun to believe was impossible in a world corrupted by men like Harrow. But as she prepared to leave the canyon and return to the world of law and civilization, she realized that the hardest choice still lay ahead. She had found love in the most unlikely place, with a man from a different world who had shown her what it meant to fight for something larger than herself. "What happens to us?" she asked Kiaha quietly, as Colonel Morrison's men prepared for the journey back to Cedar Ridge. "We build a future," Kiaha replied, his eyes holding promises that made her heart race. "Together, one day at a time, one choice at a time, until we've created something that honors both our peoples." As they rode out of the canyon together, Cassandra knew that the real story was just beginning. The collision of worlds had become a joining of hearts, and from that union something entirely new would be born. The war was over before it had truly begun, but the love story that would reshape the frontier was just starting to unfold. 3 months after Ezekiel Harrow's arrest, the autumn air carried the scent of wood smoke and changing leaves across the valley that had once been the site of Kiaha's destroyed village, where ashes and charred bones had once marked the graves of the innocent new structures now rose from the earth, not the traditional teepees of the Comanche nor the wooden buildings of white settlers, but something entirely different, something that spoke of two worlds learning to become one. Cassandra stood on the porch of the trading post she and Kiaha had built together, watching the daily miracle of former enemies working side by side. Tom Bradley, whose brother had been killed in one of Harrow's manufactured raids, was showing Running Bear how to repair a wagon wheel. Their conversation, a mixture of broken English and hand gestures that somehow conveyed more understanding than years of formal diplomacy had achieved. "The supply wagon from Austin should arrive this afternoon," Marcus said, emerging from the post with a ledger tucked under his arm. In the months since Harrow's downfall, Cassandra's father had thrown himself into the work of building this new community with the fervor of a man seeking redemption for past sins. 3 families of settlers coming to look at land grants and 2 Comanche bands interested in establishing winter quarters nearby. "Good," Cassandra replied, though part of her still marveled at how casually her father now discussed the integration of peoples who had been at war just months before. "Any word from Colonel Morrison?" "His letter came this morning," Marcus said, producing an official-looking envelope. "Harrow's trial has been scheduled for next month. Morrison says the territorial governor wants you to testify in person, Make sure there's no question about the validity of the evidence." Cassandra nodded, though the thought of facing Harrow again in a courtroom still made her stomach tighten with anxiety. The man who had orchestrated so much death and suffering was finally going to face justice, but she knew that her testimony would be crucial in ensuring he couldn't buy or manipulate his way to freedom. "I'll be there," she said. "We both will." The sound of approaching horses drew their attention to the road that wound through the valley. Kiaha was returning from his weekly meeting with the territorial Indian agent, his face grave in a way that immediately put Cassandra on alert. He dismounted with the fluid grace that never failed to make her heart skip a beat, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the careful way he was choosing his words before he spoke. "What is it?" she asked, moving to his side with the instinctive partnership that had developed between them over these months of building something unprecedented. "News from Washington." Kiaha said, his English now carrying only the faintest trace of accent after months of daily practice. "The federal government is reconsidering the treaties signed after Harrow's arrest." Marcus looked up sharply from his ledger. "What does that mean?" "It means," Kiaha said grimly, "that some people in the capital believe we have been given too much too quickly. They think the territorial governor exceeded his authority in promising land rights and self-governance to Comanche bands." The words hit Cassandra like a physical blow. Everything they had built, everything they had fought for, could be swept away by politicians who had never set foot in Texas, who saw the complex realities of frontier life as nothing more than lines on a map to be redrawn at will. "They can't just cancel treaties," she said. "There are laws, procedures. There are also elections," Kiaha replied, "and voters who believe that Indians should be grateful for reservations, not demanding equal treatment under territorial law." Before Cassandra could respond, another group of riders appeared on the road, but these weren't the mixed parties of settlers and Comanche that had become common in the valley. These were federal soldiers, their uniforms crisp and their bearing official, led by an officer whose insignia marked him as at least a major. "Trouble," Marcus muttered, his hand moving instinctively toward the rifle leaning against the porch rail. "No," Kiaha said quietly but with absolute authority. "We handle this with words, not weapons. Violence now would destroy everything we've accomplished." The federal patrol rode directly to the trading post, their formation designed to demonstrate official authority. The major dismounted with military precision, his eyes taking in the mixed community with obvious disapproval. "I am Major William Curtis, representing the Bureau of Indian Affairs," he announced. "I'm looking for the individuals calling themselves Cassandra Wells and Kiaha of the Comanche Nation." "You've found us," Cassandra said, stepping forward with Kiaha beside her. "What can we do for you, Major?" Curtis studied them both with the kind of cold assessment that reminded Cassandra uncomfortably of Ezekiel Harrow. "You can explain how a white woman and a savage warrior have established what appears to be an illegal settlement on federal territory." The word savage hung in the air like a slap, and Cassandra felt Kiaha's muscles tense beside her, but his voice remained calm when he spoke. "This settlement was established under the authority of territorial treaties signed by Governor Mitchell and ratified by the federal government," he said. "All land grants and trading licenses have been properly documented and filed. Those treaties," Curtis said with satisfaction, "are currently under review by the Department of the Interior. Preliminary findings suggest they were signed without proper federal oversight and may be declared null and void." "On what grounds?" Marcus demanded, his face flushing with anger. "On the grounds that territorial governors do not have the authority to grant sovereignty rights to Indian nations," Curtis replied, "and on the grounds that certain individuals involved in these negotiations may have been acting under duress or coercion." The implication was clear. They were suggesting that Cassandra had been somehow forced to support the treaties that her testimony against Harrow had been influenced by her captivity among the Comanche. "That's ridiculous," Cassandra said, her own anger beginning to rise. "I testified voluntarily with full knowledge of the consequences." "Did you?" Curtis asked. "Or were you suffering from what Army doctors are calling captivity syndrome, a condition where prisoners develop irrational loyalty to their captors?" The clinical term made Cassandra's skin crawl. They were trying to reduce her choices, her love, her commitment to justice to nothing more than a medical condition that could be dismissed and ignored. "My feelings and my testimony are my own," she said firmly. "No one coerced me into anything." "Nevertheless," Curtis continued, "the federal government has concerns about the precedent being set here. If every territorial governor can negotiate independent treaties with hostile Indian tribes, the authority of federal Indian policy becomes meaningless." "Hostile." Kiaha's voice carried a dangerous edge that made several of the federal soldiers shift nervously in their saddles. "We have been at peace for 3 months. We have honored every provision of our agreements. How exactly are we hostile?" "You are hostile," Curtis said, "because you exist outside the reservation system, because you claim rights and territories that properly belong to the United States government, because you represent a challenge to the orderly administration of Indian affairs." Around them, the daily life of the settlement had ground to a halt as word of the confrontation spread. Cassandra could see settlers and Comanche gathering in small groups, their faces reflecting the same mixture of anger and fear that she felt in her own chest. "What exactly are you here to do, Major?" she asked. "I am here to inform you that this settlement is being placed under federal investigation," Curtis replied. "All residents, both white and Indian, are to remain in the valley pending a determination of the legal status of the land grants and treaties." "You're making us prisoners," Marcus said. "I am ensuring compliance with federal law," Curtis corrected. "Anyone who attempts to leave the valley without federal permission will be considered a fugitive from justice." The trap was closing around them just as surely as if Harrow himself were still pulling the strings. Different men, different methods, but the same result, the destruction of everything they had built together. "There is another way," Kiaha said quietly. Curtis raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening." "Trial by federal court," Kiaha said. "We demand the right to defend our treaties before federal judges with full legal representation and the opportunity to present evidence." "Indians don't have standing in federal courts," Curtis replied dismissively. "But I do," Cassandra said, understanding immediately what Kiaha was proposing. "As a white citizen who was directly involved in the treaty negotiations, I have the right to challenge any federal action that violates agreements I helped to negotiate." Curtis's expression showed that he hadn't expected this response. "Miss Wells, I hardly think—" "Furthermore," Cassandra continued, her voice gaining strength as the legal argument took shape in her mind, "any declaration that the treaties are invalid would also invalidate the territorial government's authority to try Ezekiel Harrow for his crimes. If Governor Mitchell exceeded his authority in making peace with the Comanche, then he also exceeded his authority in ordering Harrow's arrest." The logic was unassailable, and Curtis knew it. Declaring the treaties invalid would create a legal precedent that could undermine the entire structure of territorial government. "You're saying that challenging our treaties means challenging the entire legal framework that brought Harrow to justice," Kiaha said, following Cassandra's reasoning. "The federal government would have to choose between maintaining territorial authority and destroying the treaties." "Exactly," Cassandra said. "And I'm betting they won't want to let Harrow go free just to spite a few Indians who've learned to live in peace with their white neighbors." Curtis was silent for a long moment, clearly realizing that what had seemed like a simple administrative action had become a complex legal nightmare. Around them, the members of the settlement watched and waited, understanding that their entire future hung in the balance. "I'll need to consult with my superiors," Curtis said finally. "You do that," Cassandra replied. "In the meantime, we'll be here living peacefully on land that was legally granted to us under treaties that were properly ratified by the territorial government." After the federal patrol withdrew to make their camp at the mouth of the valley, the settlement buzzed with nervous energy. Emergency meetings were called, plans were made, and messengers were dispatched to carry word to other Comanche bands and sympathetic settlers throughout the territory. That evening, as the sun set behind the mountains that ringed their valley, Cassandra and Kiaha sat together on the porch of their cabin, watching the lights come on in the windows of the community they had built from nothing but hope and determination. "Do you think it will work?" Cassandra asked, her head resting against Kiaha's shoulder. "Do you think we can really force them to choose between justice and prejudice?" "I think," Kiaha said, his arm tightening around her, "that we have built something worth fighting for, and I think that sometimes when people are forced to choose between what is right and what is easy, they surprise themselves by choosing what is right. And if they don't—" Kiaha was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the distant stars that seemed to promise infinite possibilities. "Then we fight another way. We find other allies, other legal strategies, other paths to justice, but we don't give up. We don't let them destroy what we've built." A month later, Cassandra stood in a federal courtroom in Austin, facing a panel of 3 judges who would determine the fate of everything she and Kiaha had created together. The legal arguments had raged for days, with the best lawyers from both sides presenting complex constitutional theories and precedent-setting cases. But in the end, it came down to something much simpler than legal theory. It came down to the question of whether the federal government was willing to honor its own promises, whether justice was more important than bureaucratic convenience. "Miss Wells," said Judge Harrison, the senior member of the panel, "you have argued that invalidating the territorial treaties would undermine the legal basis for Mr. Harrow's prosecution. How do you respond to the government's contention that federal law takes precedence over territorial agreements?" "Your Honor," Cassandra replied, her voice steady despite the weight of so many lives resting on her words, "I respond that the law must be consistent to be legitimate. If territorial governors can arrest and try men for crimes against Indians, then they must also have the authority to make peace with those same Indians. You cannot have justice for some and legal chaos for others." "And you, Mr. Kiaha," Judge Harrison continued, "how do you respond to the argument that Indian tribes cannot be considered equal partners in territorial governance?" Kiaha rose with the dignity that had first captured Cassandra's attention months ago in a very different courtroom. "Your Honor," he said, "I respond that 3 months ago, my people and Miss Wells's people were at war. Today we live in piecework together and build a future that serves both our children. This is not a legal theory, this is a proven fact. The question is whether the federal government will support success or insist on failure." The judges deliberated for 2 days. When they returned with their decision, Cassandra felt her heart hammering so hard she was sure everyone in the courtroom could hear it. "This court finds," Judge Harrison announced, "that the territorial treaties were properly negotiated and ratified under existing federal law. Furthermore, this court finds that the precedent of peaceful coexistence established in the Cedar Ridge Valley serves the interests of both the federal government and the citizens of Texas." The decision sent shockwaves through the territorial capital and beyond. Federal officials who had expected a routine affirmation of bureaucratic authority found themselves forced to acknowledge that sometimes the law actually meant what it said. 6 months later, Cassandra and Kiaha were married in a ceremony that blended traditions from both their cultures, witnessed by a congregation that would have been unimaginable just a year before. Colonel Morrison served as Cassandra's escort down the aisle, while Grandmother Ituha blessed the union with ancient Comanche prayers. The wedding celebration lasted 3 days, with fiddle music and war dances, white women's quilting circles, and Comanche storytelling children playing games that mixed elements from both traditions. "Do you think they understand what they're witnessing?" Cassandra asked Kiaha as they watched Little Wolf teaching settler children how to track animals, while Sarah Mitchell, the minister's daughter, showed Comanche girls how to embroider flowers on fabric. "I think they understand that different doesn't have to mean enemy," Kiaha replied, "and I think that's enough to build a future on." As the sun set on their wedding day, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Cassandra looked out over the valley that had become their home. Where Harrow's greed had once sown death and hatred, love and justice had planted seeds of something entirely new. The trading post buzzed with activity as merchants from both cultures exchanged goods and ideas. The school they had built taught children in both English and Comanche, preparing them for a world where such knowledge would be a strength rather than a curiosity. Most importantly, the cemetery on the hill held graves marked with both Christian crosses and Comanche symbols, reminding everyone who passed that honor and remembrance transcended the boundaries of race and creed. "What do you think Ayana would say about all this?" Cassandra asked softly, her hand finding Kiaha's as they stood before the simple stone that marked his first wife's grave. "I think," Kiaha said, his voice thick with emotion, "she would say that love is stronger than hatred, and that from the ashes of the worst tragedies the most beautiful futures can grow." As they walked back toward their home past the trading post, where former enemies had become business partners, past the school where children learned that difference was something to celebrate rather than fear, past the courthouse where justice had finally proven stronger than prejudice, Cassandra knew that they had built something that would endure. The collision of worlds had become the foundation of a new world, and the love story that began with kidnapping and suspicion had become the cornerstone of a community where peace was not just possible but proven. In the distance, a wolf howled at the rising moon, and from the Comanche section of the settlement, voices rose in an ancient song of gratitude to the spirits who watched over those brave enough to choose love over fear. The future stretched ahead of them like an unwritten book full of challenges and possibilities, but whatever came next, they would face it together as equals, as partners, as proof that even the deepest wounds could heal when tended by hands united in common purpose.